Good evening. What we have witnessed unfolding across Russia in the past 72 hours represents a massive intelligence gap for the West. It slipped past everyone. The White House, the alliance in Brussels, and even the veteran observers of Moscow. We are seeing a specific kind of power projection here, not one born of strength, but a calculated gamble by a state feeling encircled and compelled to radically alter the strategic balance. The shockwave of this move cannot be overstated. It has caught American leadership off balance to a degree reminiscent of the earliest and most volatile days of the Cold War. Consequently, the strategic calculus has changed overnight. The Pentagon must now reevaluate its risk assessments. NATO must question its foundational beliefs, and analysts are forced to throw out the old playbook on how the Kremlin operates. Understand this: what Moscow has executed is far removed from mere symbolism or empty rhetoric. This is not a minor adjustment, nor is it easily reversible. We are witnessing a fundamental restructuring of the European security architecture, a clear signal that the Kremlin is digging in for a protracted and high-stakes standoff that could very well define the geopolitical landscape of the next decade. The initial indicators of this pivot did not break on cable news or social media feeds. Instead, they surfaced quietly within the classified data streams used to monitor Russia's most guarded military assets. For weeks, American intelligence officers have been flagging a series of anomalies. Garrisons that are typically static began redeploying under a veil of silence. We observed rail lines active with hardware pulled from deep-level bunkers, and thermal imaging picked up operational spikes at facilities running well outside their standard hours. In isolation, a single data point might be dismissed, but viewed as a whole, the pattern simply did not align with seasonal exercises. It bore no resemblance to prior mobilization efforts or standard troop rotations. The data pointed to a distinct deviation from the norm, a prelude to something far more significant. Then, with startling speed, the dynamic shifted entirely. Russia executed a maneuver that fundamentally rewrites the risk calculus for both the United States and NATO. They initiated a redeployment of key strategic deterrents into a posture that leaves Western planners with very few good options. We need to be clear about what moved. This was not standard logistical supply. These are the crown jewels of the Kremlin's arsenal, assets that are typically sequestered in deep reserve, brought into the light only during periods of existential geopolitical strain. Specifically, Russia has surged its advanced mobile missile platforms toward the front. It is crucial to distinguish these from the tactical systems grinding away in Ukraine. These are theater-level weapons, engineered expressly to hold NATO targets at risk. We are seeing them positioned aggressively along Russia's western periphery, folded into revised command and control networks, and operating under alert protocols that far exceed standard posturing. Simultaneously, Moscow has initiated a parallel strategy of dispersion across its vast interior. By scattering these strategic strike assets into remote sectors, they are effectively blinding American surveillance, making the task of tracking, targeting, and accurately assessing the threat level exponentially more difficult. This specific operational posture, the simultaneous projection of force to the front lines paired with the diffusion of assets in the rear, is among the most troubling signals a major power can transmit. It speaks to a high state of readiness. It reveals a meticulous level of planning, but most critically, it is designed to reintroduce strategic ambiguity. Russia is effectively clouding the American assessments, injecting volatility into the equation right at the moment Washington felt it had the Kremlin-esque capabilities fully mapped out. When viewed through the prism of offensive realism, which remains the most reliable framework for decoding statecraft, this maneuver is not erratic. It is entirely logical. The Kremlin operates under the conviction that it faces an existential threat. In their assessment, the collective West is engaged in a concerted effort to degrade Russian power, enforce containment, and conduct a war of attrition via the Ukrainian proxy. To Moscow, this is not a localized border skirmish. It is the culmination of a decades-long strategy of encirclement that began the moment the Soviet Union fell. And history teaches us that when a great power perceives its survival is at risk, it abandons diplomatic niceties. It discards predictability. Instead, it embraces the brutal rationality of hard power. It unilaterally redraws the lines of engagement to maximize leverage, foster instability, and compel the adversary to hesitate before climbing the escalation ladder. However, the tactical geography is secondary to the operational art displayed here. The real story is the execution. These assets were relocated with a degree of stealth and logistical discipline that completely contradicts the prevailing Western assessment. For the past 2 years, the dominant narrative in Washington has been that the Russian military machine is exhausted, broken by the meat grinder of Ukraine. This maneuver serves as a stark corrective to that assumption. It demonstrates that the Kremlin maintains absolute command integrity over the assets that actually dictate long-term survival against the West. We must make a crucial distinction. While Russia's conventional infantry may be degraded from battle, its strategic forces, the arm of the military designed for great power war, remain untouched, highly mobile, and capable of rapid, coordinated deployment. The moment the intelligence community corroborated the full scope of this deployment, Washington underwent a systemic shift. The bureaucracy snapped back into a defensive analysis footing that has been dormant for years. Inside the Pentagon, the order was given to immediately overhaul forward projections. The National Security Council convened emergency sessions, while intelligence analysts began wargaming scenarios that have not been seriously tabletopped since the early 2000s. Across the Atlantic, NATO commanders, specifically those guarding the eastern flank, quietly ratcheted up their readiness levels. To the public eye, the airwaves remain dead silent. But in high-stakes statecraft, silence is often the loudest alarm bell. Behind that wall of official silence, the U.S. establishment recognizes the grim reality. Russia is not merely posturing for the cameras. Moscow is signaling that the rules of engagement have changed, and they are prepared to operate within a much more volatile margin of error. Washington's working theory was that Moscow would remain bogged down in a conventional grind, mobilizing infantry, stabilizing fronts, and relying on the slow bleed of attritional warfare within Ukrainian borders. That assumption has been shattered. The Pentagon did not anticipate a maneuver that transcends the localized battlefield and projects the conflict directly into the macro-strategic domain. Through this redeployment, the Kremlin is transmitting a blunt frequency to the White House. Strategic pressure is a two-way street. If you climb the ladder in Ukraine, we will climb the ladder in theaters where your defenses are thin. This is textbook asymmetric deterrence, but applied with a sophistication that leaves American policymakers with a shrinking menu of viable responses. The United States is now trapped in a strategic trilemma. Option one, double down in Ukraine and risk provoking Russian escalation in entirely different global theaters. Option two, mirror the move by shifting American strategic assets, thereby triggering an uncontrolled mobilization spiral reminiscent of the 1980s. Or option three, hesitate. But hesitation cedes the initiative, handing Moscow leverage across every contested domain. We have arrived at the hard structural truth of great power competition. Washington and Moscow are locked in a zero-sum contest over the fundamental security architecture of Europe. In a standoff between nuclear titans, intent is secondary. Perception is everything. The Kremlin does not need to issue direct verbal threats. It simply needs to recalibrate the American risk assessment. And they have succeeded. They have injected a dangerous variable of uncertainty regarding their pain threshold. The true readiness of their strategic triad and the velocity at which they can climb the escalation ladder. Now, map out the geopolitical fallout. The frontline NATO states, Poland, the Baltics, Romania, are waking up to a radically degraded threat landscape. They are now operating within the direct kill box of Russia's forward deployed long-range fires. The diplomatic pressure on Washington, D.C. is intense. These capitals are not just asking for verbal reassurance. They are demanding hard power, expanded air defense umbrellas, integrated missile shields, and heavy localized deployments. Yet every American asset moved east carries a hidden cost. Here lies the trap. If Washington pushes high-end systems too close to the Russian periphery, Moscow won't view it as defensive. They will interpret it as the prepositioning for a decapitation strike. That perception triggers a Russian countermove, which forces a U as reaction, creating a kinetic feedback loop without desiring war. Both sides sleepwalk into a terminal crisis. This is the classic security dilemma, the inherent tragedy of great power rivalry. It engineers a structural reality where escalation becomes the path of least resistance. And Russia's shock maneuver has just hit the accelerator on this fatal dynamic. Viewed from the Kremlin, this escalation was not optional. It was a strategic imperative. Russia operates on the conviction that it cannot coexist with a Europe under absolute NATO hegemony. Conversely, for Washington, this move is an agent of chaos. It destroys the predictability that is the bedrock of nuclear stability. And when the architecture of predictability collapses, the probability of catastrophic miscalculation spikes. Here lies the fundamental disconnect that Western observers often miss. Russia does not see itself as losing. It sees itself as adapting. The leadership in Moscow views their nation as a fortress under siege, and every military realignment is a necessary countermeasure to prevent total strategic collapse. This is the raw survival instinct of a great power at work. Consequently, the United States is tasked with an agonizing calibration. Washington cannot let this challenge pass unanswered. Yet an overcorrection risks disaster. The objective is to uphold deterrence without breaching that invisible red line that triggers a spasm of even greater Russian aggression. We are witnessing a high wire act of brinkmanship that American leadership has not had to perform in decades, and the margin for error is non existent. Russia has effectively proven it is willing and able to widen the theater of operations far beyond the Ukrainian border. It has demonstrated a resilience and agility in its strategic forces that intelligence estimates failed to capture. The signal to the White House is unequivocal. Moscow refuses to be checkmated. Apply pressure, and they will ratchet up the intensity, attempt containment, and they will expand their reach. Present the threat, and they will maneuver assets to paralyze American decision-making. We have crossed the threshold into a new paradigm of conflict, one where the battlefield is no longer contained by geography, one where the stakes transcend politics. Russia has pulled a lever no one anticipated, forcing the United States to reckon with a more perilous global reality. Make no mistake, this is not the closing chapter. It is merely the opening salvo